I was 16 years old the night my father put a garbage bag on the front porch and told me to take it and go. It was a Thursday in November, cold enough that I could see my breath. I was wearing a hoodie that wasn't thick enough for the temperature because I'd left my jacket inside and he wouldn't let me back in to get it. The garbage bag had some clothes in it, a few books, the birthday card my grandmother sent me 2 years before she died. That was everything I owned, apparently. That was 16 years of being their daughter, stuffed into a black plastic bag on a Wednesday night, handed to me on a Thursday. My mother stood in the doorway while it happened. She didn't say a word. My father's name is Richard. He'd been laid off 8 months earlier, and the version of him that existed before the layoff was mostly gone by then. The man who used to help me with homework and make pancakes on Sundays had been replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Someone who drank too much and slept too late and looked for reasons to be angry. He found one in me constantly. The specific reason he gave that night was that I was disrespectful. I disagreed with him at dinner about something I can't even remember now. Some small thing. The kind of disagreement that normal families have and move past. But he wasn't capable of moving past anything anymore. He stood up from the table and told me to get out of his house. I thought he meant go to my room. He meant leave. My mother's name is Sandra. She taught elementary school for 20 years and used to be the kind of person who kept extra granola bars in her purse in case she saw someone hungry on the street. I watched her stand in that doorway while my father pointed at me and told me to go, and I kept waiting for her to say something, to do something, to be the person I thought she was. She looked at her shoes instead. I had $43 in my wallet. I had a phone with a cracked screen and 40% battery. I had a garbage bag and no jacket and nowhere to go. My sister Mia was 11 years old. She was upstairs when it happened. I found out later that she heard everything from her bedroom and cried herself to sleep that night. She was too young to do anything. I never blamed her for not coming downstairs. I walked to my friend Dara's house because it was the only place I could think of. Dara and I had been friends since 6th grade, and she lived about a mile away. I knocked on her door at 9:30 at night with a garbage bag over my shoulder, and she opened the door and took one look at me and pulled me inside without asking questions. Her parents let me sleep on their couch that night, then the night after that, then for 3 weeks while we figured out what came next. Dara's mother, Patricia, called my parents the second day I was there. My father told her I was welcome to come home if I was willing to apologize. My mother didn't get on the phone. I didn't apologize because I hadn't done anything worth apologizing for. Patricia didn't push me to go back. She was a practical woman who worked in hospital administration and understood situations quickly. She sat with me at her kitchen table one evening and laid out the options clearly. I could go back home and live under conditions that weren't healthy. I could enter the foster care system. Or I could find a way to support myself with their help until I turned 18. I chose the third option. I got a job at a grocery store 2 days later. The manager, a quiet man named Dale, hired me for weekend shifts and eventually gave me weekday hours too when he saw I showed up on time every day and didn't complain. I made minimum wage and saved almost all of it because Patricia refused to take money for the couch. She said I could pay her back by doing well. I finished high school by going to class every morning and working most evenings and telling no one what was happening at home because I didn't want people's pity. I wanted to graduate. I graduated. I walked across that stage and collected my diploma and looked out at the audience and found Dara's family in the third row, all 4 of them standing and clapping. My parents weren't there. I'd invited them. My mother read the message because I could see the receipt on my phone. She didn't respond. I enrolled in community college that fall with money I'd saved and a small scholarship I'd applied for without telling anyone. I studied business administration because I understood money in the way that people understand things they spent years not having. I worked at the grocery store on weekends and took on a second job at a call center on weekday evenings. I slept 6 hours a night and told myself that was enough. During those years, I didn't hate my parents. Hating them would have taken energy I needed for other things. I mostly didn't think about them at all. I built a routine that had no room for resentment. I woke up, I worked, I studied, I slept. I did it again the next day. What I felt, when I felt anything, was a cold and steady kind of determination. They had decided I wasn't worth keeping. I was going to prove that was the worst decision they ever made. Not for them, for me. The first time I made more than $30,000 in a year, I cried in my car in a parking garage for about 10 minutes and then drove home and made dinner like nothing had happened. That was 3 years after I left home. I was 19. The amount sounds modest now, but at the time it felt enormous because I'd started from $43 in a garbage bag, and every dollar between then and that paycheck was one I'd earned completely alone. I finished my associate's degree and transferred to a 4-year university with credits that nearly covered my first 2 semesters. I studied hard and made connections with professors who saw something in me and took the time to say so. One of them, a professor named Elena who taught financial markets, pulled me aside after class one afternoon and told me I thought about money differently than most students she'd taught. She said, I understood risk in a personal way that most people only understood theoretically. She asked if I'd considered investment analysis as a career path. I told her I'd consider anything that paid well and rewarded actual work instead of appearances. She laughed and said that narrowed it down more than I realized. She connected me with a firm called Caldwell Group that took on a limited number of interns from universities in the area. The interview was with a senior analyst named Marcus Webb, who asked me 3 technical questions and then spent 40 minutes asking about how I handled setbacks. I answered every question honestly, including the parts about being on my own since 16. He didn't flinch at any of it. He offered me the internship at the end of the meeting. I worked at Caldwell Group for the last 2 years of university while finishing my degree on nights and weekends. Marcus ran his team with a clarity I hadn't seen in any workplace before. He was direct about expectations. He acknowledged people's contributions publicly. He corrected mistakes privately. When I did something well, he said so specifically, not with vague praise, but with exact descriptions of what worked and why it mattered. Working for someone like that after everything I'd been through felt almost strange. I kept waiting for the version of events where he took credit for my analysis or left me off an important report or looked past me at an all-hands meeting. It never came. He promoted me to junior analyst before I graduated. He gave me my first independent client account 6 months after that. I moved out of the room I'd been renting and into a small apartment by myself. The first night there, I sat on the floor because I didn't have furniture yet and ate takeout from a container and looked around at the empty walls and thought about that garbage bag on the porch. I thought about my father's face when he told me to go. I thought about my mother's eyes looking down at her shoes. I didn't call them. They hadn't called me either, not once in 3 years. Not on my birthday, not when I graduated, not for any reason at all. Mia found me through social media when she was 14. She sent me a message saying she thought about me all the time and missed me and wanted to know if I was okay. I called her that same day. We talked for 2 hours. She told me that the house was tense all the time now and that Dad had gotten some contract work but still drank too much and that Mom was quiet in a way that seemed permanent. She said she was sorry for what happened, and I told her she had nothing to be sorry for. We started talking every few weeks after that. She was careful never to mention it to our parents. I was her secret and she was mine. At 22, I received a full-time offer from Caldwell Group with a compensation package that made me read the email 3 times to make sure I hadn't misread it. Marcus walked me through the terms himself and explained the bonus structure and the growth path he had in mind for me. He said he wanted to retain people who actually did the work and made sure they knew it. I thought about Victor from the transcript of someone else's life I'd never lived and understood exactly what he meant. I accepted the offer and spent the next 2 years building expertise in real estate investment analysis specifically. I liked tangible assets. I liked the way numbers connected to physical things you could walk through and touch. Marcus encouraged the specialization and started routing relevant client work my way. I was 24 when I closed my first significant deal, a commercial property acquisition worth $11 million. I'd done all the analysis. I'd identified the opportunity. I'd prepared the client presentation and handled every question in the room. Marcus introduced me to the client and then sat back and let me run the meeting entirely. When the client shook my hand afterward and said they were moving forward, Marcus was the first one to say my name to the partners. I went home that night and called Dara. She screamed so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. She called Patricia to the phone, and Patricia told me she always knew and that she wanted me to know she was proud of me. I thanked her for the couch, and she said I'd repaid her 100 times over by becoming someone worth knowing. I thought about calling my parents that night. I picked up my phone and looked at my father's number, which I still had saved even though we hadn't spoken in 6 years. I put the phone down and went to sleep. I wasn't ready, and neither were they. The call I was thinking about required something from them that they hadn't shown any signs of being capable of yet. I could wait. I was good at waiting. I'd been doing it my whole life. By 27, I owned 3 things that my 16-year-old self would have found impossible to believe. A condo in a building with a doorman, a car that started every time I turned the key, and a savings account with a number in it that represented genuine security, not just the absence of immediate disaster. None of it was inherited. None of it was given. Every piece of it came from showing up every single day and doing the work when other people were networking or managing perceptions or figuring out who to impress. I had no one to impress. I had no safety net to fall back on. The only option was forward. Marcus made partner at Caldwell Group the year I turned 26, and he brought me with him in the sense that his promotion created an opening in the senior analyst position he was vacating. I applied for it along with 2 other candidates. The partners reviewed our files and asked each of us to present a market analysis. I presented mine on a Monday morning in the firm's main conference room to 6 people who had the ability to shape the next decade of my career. I wasn't nervous in the way I expected to be. I'd been doing versions of this presentation for clients for 3 years. The difference was the audience, not the content. I knew my content completely. I was offered the senior analyst position 3 days later. The email came from the managing partner, a woman named Diane, who added a handwritten note at the bottom saying she was glad the firm had found me before someone else did. I framed that note and put it on my desk. The work at the senior level was harder and more visible and more meaningful than anything I'd done before. I led a team of 4 analysts on a portfolio restructuring project for a regional real estate fund that had been mismanaged for years. The fund was bleeding money through poor asset allocation and ignored maintenance liabilities. I spent 4 months analyzing every property and every contract and every vendor relationship. I identified 14 areas where the fund could recover value quickly and developed a long-term strategy for sustainable growth. The clients saw results within the first year. The fund stopped losing money and started generating returns. They extended our engagement and referred us to 2 of their industry contacts. Both referrals turned into accounts. My name was on all of it. Every report, every client meeting, every presentation deck. Marcus made sure of that, but honestly, by that point, I'd stopped needing someone else to make sure. I'd learned to make sure myself. I documented everything. I built relationships directly with clients so they knew who was actually doing the work. I sent follow-up emails with my analysis attached under my name. I didn't wait for permission to be visible. Priya, a financial advisor I started working with around that time, told me I was more financially sophisticated than most of her clients who had twice my net worth. She helped me structure my savings and start building investment positions of my own, small at first, then larger as my income grew. She was meticulous and honest and never recommended anything she didn't fully believe in. I trusted her completely, which was not something I said about many people. My life outside work was quieter than most people my age. I had close friends, Dara most importantly, but I didn't spend energy on relationships that felt performative or exhausting. I was particular about who I gave my time to. Years of having no one to rely on had made me careful about who I let close. It also made me deeply loyal to the few people who earned it. Mia visited me for the first time when she was 18 and had just started university. She took a bus to my city and I picked her up from the station, and she walked into my condo and stood in the middle of the living room with her mouth open. She said she'd imagined what my life looked like, but the reality was better. I made dinner and we sat up until 2 in the morning talking about everything we'd missed in each other's lives. She told me things about our parents that I hadn't known. That our father had stopped drinking 2 years after I left, but the damage to the marriage had already been done. That our mother had become withdrawn and rarely left the house outside of work. That the relationship between our parents was functional but hollow, like two people going through routines because neither of them had figured out what came next. She told me our father had asked about me once. Just once. He'd asked Mia if I was okay. She told him I was doing well, and he nodded and didn't say anything else. I didn't know what to do with that information, so I set it aside. My 30th birthday arrived on a Tuesday. I took the day off work, which I almost never did, and drove to the beach with Dara and her husband and 2 other close friends. We ate too much and stayed until the sun went down and the cold came in off the water. Dara gave a toast where she listed every year I'd known her and one thing she remembered about me from each of them. The year I was 16, the thing she remembered was that I showed up at her door on a cold night in November and didn't ask for anything. She said that was the moment she understood what kind of person I was going to become. I looked out at the water while she talked and thought about how far I was from that porch and that garbage bag and that cold November air. 10 years. I'd rebuilt an entire life in 10 years, starting from nothing. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't check it until after the toast. It was a message from a number I hadn't seen in years. My mother's number. The message was short. It said she needed to talk to me. It said it was important. It said she was sorry it had been so long. I read it twice. I put my phone back in my pocket. I looked at the water for a long time. Then I went back to the people who'd shown up for me and tried to be present for the rest of the evening, even though part of my brain had already started preparing for whatever was coming. I didn't respond to my mother's message that night, or the next day. I needed time to think about what responding meant before I did it. Dara knew something had happened because she'd known me for 14 years and could read minor shifts in my expression the way most people read obvious emotions. She pulled me aside before we left the beach and asked if I was okay. I showed her the message. She read it and handed my phone back without saying anything for a moment. She said it was my decision, and she'd support whatever I chose. Then she said she hoped I'd give myself time before making it. I called my mother 4 days later on a Sunday morning. I sat in my kitchen with coffee and the door to my balcony open so I could hear the city below. I dialed and it rang 3 times and then she answered and her voice sounded older than I remembered. More tired. Like the sound of someone who'd been carrying something heavy for a long time. She said my name and then went quiet for a second, like she hadn't prepared for the moment I actually answered. I waited. She started with the small things. She asked how I was. She said she'd heard from Mia that I was doing well and that she was glad. She said the years had gone fast. I listened and didn't fill the silence with anything easy because the silence wasn't easy and pretending otherwise felt dishonest. Then she told me why she was calling. My father had been diagnosed with a serious cardiac condition 8 months earlier. 2 surgeries and a hospital stay that stretched to 3 weeks. Their insurance had covered some of it. The rest had arrived in bills that kept coming. Stacked on the kitchen table, each one bigger than the one before. They'd used their savings in the first 2 months. They'd refinanced the house. They'd borrowed from my father's brother, who didn't have much to lend. Now the house was facing foreclosure. They were 4 months behind on the mortgage. My father was unable to work at the level he had before. My mother was still teaching, but the salary alone wasn't enough to cover the mortgage plus the remaining medical debt plus the daily expenses of a household. She told me she didn't know who else to call. She said Mia was still in school and couldn't help financially. She said my father's brother had nothing left to give. She said she was sorry for calling after so long and for asking for something after everything. She didn't say sorry for the night my father put a garbage bag on the porch. She didn't say sorry for standing in the doorway and looking at her shoes. She didn't say sorry for 10 years of silence. But the apology she did offer was said in a voice that sounded like she was asking for something she didn't feel she had the right to ask for. I told her I'd heard everything she said. I told her I needed time to think and would call her back within the week. She said she understood. She thanked me for answering. I sat in my kitchen for a long time after the call ended. The coffee went cold. The city made its Sunday sounds below the balcony. I thought about the garbage bag. I thought about my father's face. I thought about my mother's shoes. I thought about the $43. I thought about the couch at Dara's house and Dale giving me weekend shifts at the grocery store and Elena telling me I understood risk in a personal way and Marcus saying my name to the partners and Priya building me a structure for a future I was creating entirely alone. I thought about all of it and then I called Mia. She already knew. She'd been waiting for me to call. She'd known our parents were going to reach out and she'd been trying to figure out how to tell me. She sounded guilty in that particular way she had when she felt caught between two sides of something. I told her she had nothing to feel guilty about. I asked her to tell me everything she knew. She laid it out completely. The diagnosis had come suddenly. My father had ignored symptoms for months before he collapsed at work and was rushed to the hospital. The first surgery was an emergency. The second was scheduled 2 months later when complications developed. He was stable now, but his capacity for sustained physical work was permanently reduced. He was 61 and his options were limited. The house was the one they'd lived in since before I was born. My mother had lived there for 32 years. Losing it meant more than just losing a building. It meant losing the last material thing that connected them to any version of stability they'd ever had. Mia said she didn't know what I should do. She said she wouldn't tell me what to do, and she meant it. She said she loved me and she loved them and she was going to love me whatever I decided. I thanked her and told her I'd figure it out. I called Priya the next morning. I laid out the numbers my mother had given me without providing any emotional context. I asked Priya to tell me what helping would look like financially and whether it was feasible without affecting my own position in any significant way. She went quiet while she reviewed my accounts. She came back and said helping was completely feasible. She said I was in a strong enough position that I could cover the immediate crisis and create a structured arrangement for ongoing support without any risk to my own financial security. She asked if I wanted her to set up the mechanism to do it. I said not yet. I said I had one more thing to figure out first. The one more thing was whether doing this was something I actually wanted to do, not whether I could, not whether it was the right thing in some abstract moral sense, but whether I, the person who had been handed a garbage bag at 16 and built everything I had from nothing, wanted to use what I'd built to save the two people who had handed me that bag. I took 3 days to answer that question honestly. I drove to my parents' house on a Saturday morning in October. I hadn't been there in 10 years. The drive took 4 hours. I stopped once for coffee and sat in the gas station parking lot for 15 minutes before getting back on the road. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The oak tree in the front yard was bigger. The paint on the shutters was peeling in a way it hadn't been before. My father's car was in the driveway, an older model I didn't recognize. I sat outside for a few minutes before going to the door. My father answered when I knocked. He looked older the way people do after serious illness, not just more years but more worn, like the body had been through something the face couldn't quite hide. He was thinner, his movements were careful. He looked at me standing on the porch, and his eyes went somewhere complicated. He said my name. I said hello. He opened the door wider and stepped back so I could come in. My mother came from the kitchen when she heard the door. She looked at me the way someone looks at a thing they weren't sure they'd ever see again. Her hands were clasped in front of her. She looked like she might say something formal, and then she didn't. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where the argument had happened 10 years ago, the same chairs, different light fixture above it. I noticed small things, because noticing small things was how I managed large moments. My father sat across from me. My mother sat beside him. There was a stack of papers at the edge of the table, bills and notices and documents with numbers on them that told the whole story in financial terms. I'd spent 3 days deciding what I wanted from this conversation before I had it. I knew I was going to help. I'd known that since Priya told me I could. But I needed to understand something first, and I needed to understand it from them directly, not through Mia or through a phone call where the distance made it easier to be vague. I asked my father why he put me out. He didn't answer immediately. He looked at the table. He looked older and tired and sick, and I felt something about that, some version of sympathy. But I held the question open because I needed him to actually answer it. He said he was someone different then, He said the job loss had broken something in him that he handled badly and took out on the people around him. He said there was no good reason for what he did and that he knew that. He said he'd known it almost from the moment the door closed. I asked why he didn't call then. In 10 years, he said he didn't know how. He said he thought I probably didn't want to hear from him, and he'd told himself that so many times he'd stopped questioning it. He said it was easier to believe I'd moved on completely than to face the possibility that I'd answer and he'd have to actually apologize. I looked at my mother. She said she was sorry. She said it directly and without qualifications. She said she stood in that doorway and did nothing, and it was the thing she'd been most ashamed of in her entire life. She said there was no version of an explanation that made it acceptable. She said she'd replayed that night more times than she could count and never found a way to understand her own inaction. I listened to both of them. I didn't rush to make it easier. I let them sit in what they'd said. Then I told them what I'd built. I didn't do it to impress them. I did it because they deserved to understand exactly what they'd thrown away and what I'd made from it. I told them about the grocery store and Dara's couch and community college and Marcus and Caldwell Group and the condo and Priya and the accounts and the position and the career and all of it. I told them all of it clearly and without drama. My father's eyes were wet by the end. My mother stopped trying to hold her expression together somewhere in the middle. I told them I was going to help. Not because what they did was okay. Not because the years of silence were forgiven in a morning conversation at a kitchen table. But because I'd spent 10 years building a life defined by doing the right thing regardless of what was done to me, and walking away from two sick and struggling people who happened to be my parents would have made me into someone I didn't want to be. I called Priya from the driveway that afternoon and told her to set up the mechanism. She handled the immediate mortgage arrears within a week. She structured a sustainable monthly arrangement that covered their essential costs without requiring me to be involved in day-to-day decisions about their finances. She was efficient and professional and didn't offer opinions about the personal dimensions of the situation, which was exactly what I needed from her. I didn't move back into their lives. That was never the offer. The offer was financial stability, not the restoration of a relationship that needed to be rebuilt slowly if it was going to be rebuilt at all. Mia called me the night after my parents' mortgage cleared. She said our mother had cried for an hour. She said our father had sat quietly in his chair for a long time and then told Mia that his biggest regret in life was a single Thursday night in November. Mia said she didn't know what he meant. I didn't explain it. I talked to my father on the phone 2 weeks later, a short call, practical on the surface, but with something underneath it that hadn't been there before. He asked how work was going. I told him it was going well. He said he was glad. The conversation lasted 12 minutes. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It was a beginning maybe, or maybe just an acknowledgement that the story wasn't finished yet. I told Dara everything over lunch the following week. She listened without interrupting, which was rare for her. When I finished, she sat back and said she wasn't surprised. She said she'd always known I was going to end up being the bigger person and that she meant that as a genuine compliment. I told her being the bigger person wasn't really the point. The point was being the person I decided to be regardless of what anyone else did. She said that was exactly what she meant. Looking back now at everything, the garbage bag, and the $43 and Dale's grocery store, and Dara's couch, and Marcus and Priya, and the condo and the career, and that October drive to a house with a peeling paint shutter and an oak tree that had kept growing while I was gone. I understand something I couldn't have articulated at 16. The people who leave you with nothing are sometimes teaching you, accidentally, that you can build everything. It's a brutal lesson. I wouldn't recommend it. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. But I wouldn't trade what I built because of it for anything they could have given me. Not for a single thing.